So in this third video, this final video for this week, we're going to put this all together into pay grades, pay ranges, and we'll talk a little bit about broadbanding. So we can combine our internal structure with the external market rates through our pay policy line. And the pay policy line, I'm going to say right now, is not the same thing as the market line. And in the next slide, I'll talk to you about what the differences are. In this picture, and I'll refer to this picture again, I might even come back to the slide in a later slide to show you what this looks like. What I want you to notice on here is we have our different grades, which is what we'll talk about in a couple of slides. And grades are simply combining jobs that are very similar or have similar skills, or they're just similar in terms of the way that we think about the jobs in our job structure. And they grouped them together. And then what they did is they created job grades of ranges for how much people can get paid in those jobs using the external pay information that we got from our survey. So let's talk about this pay policy line. The pay policy line translates that external survey information with the pay of our competitors into practice. So we can choose which measure we want to use for our pay policy line. Do we want to use the base pay? Do we want to use total cash? Do we want to use total compensation? And that you'll choose one of those for your pay policy line. And it will depend on what your policy is for your pay structure. You can also figure out how you want to update that market line for your pay policy line. Do you want to match the market? Do you want to lead or lag for different jobs? Or do you want to lead the market across the board? That policy line can also be a percentage of the market line. And it could be above or below the market regression line. And that would give a policy statement. So if you were above the market line, it's a little bit like a lead policy, but for all of your jobs. And if it were below that, it's like a lag policy, but you may have something else that you're giving employees in lieu of pay that might attract employees to your company. Employers can also lead by just including a few top playing competitors in their analysis. So you create your pay policy line, not on all of the market information you got from your survey, but just on some of the top payers for either particular jobs or all of your benchmark jobs within the survey. You can also lead for just some job families and lag for others. You might lead for some job families where the competition's pretty steep or it's really difficult to find employees with the particular skills you need for that job. But you might lag for others where it doesn't require a lot of skill to do that job. So lots of different people could fill that job. And often too, when you have jobs where the local market for the employees that you would get is literally in the community you're in or kind of in the region you're in, sometimes you can lag for those jobs, but you might lead for ones where the competition's more statewide or even national or international because you really have to attract the best candidates then for those jobs. If your practice doesn't match your policy, though, employees will get the wrong message and they'll be confused about what your actual policy is because you're saying one thing and then doing another. So you have to be careful that the pay policy line fits with the internal pay structure that you want to create and also the messaging that you're giving to your employees. So the sixth and final step is to design those grades and ranges. And you just saw what pay grades look like. They offer a lot of flexibility to deal with the pressures from external markets and differences among organizations because you don't have to fix someone's pay to exactly a certain number. You've got a range of numbers that you can choose from when you're setting pay for a new employee, but also when you're giving pay increases to employees that that already are working in your company. A pay range exists simply whenever you have two or more rates that are paid to employees in the same job. So if you only have one person in that job, there may not be a pay range for that particular job, but usually if you have two or more employees, they're not getting exactly the same pay for that job. So you almost always have a pay range that naturally occurs in your internal structure. A pay range can reflect the differences in performance or experience that an employer wants to recognize with pay. So this is really handy, for example, when you are hiring an employee and one employee has an extra year of experience or has an additional degree or some kind of certification that another employee who would do the same job doesn't have, then you can pay them differently because you're paying one employee for the additional education or experience that they have that the other employee doesn't. You also will have employees with consistently high performance ratings that you can always be giving them higher amounts in those pay ranges. You want to make sure, though, if they're consistently high-performing employees, that they're above the market median using that market pay line that we talked about in the second video, or that they're also above the midpoint range, which is your pay policy line that we just talked about a couple of slides ago. So you want them to be above both of those lines because you don't want a competitor to take that employee away by giving them higher pay than what you would be willing to pay them because they're high performing for you in your organization. So we have to establish the range, the pay ranges for our different jobs, the midpoints and minimums and maximums for all of those ranges. So to create a range, usually what we do is we group different jobs together because we're going to create a pay grade instead of each job has its own range. And you'll see if you're in a very large organization, maybe you have hundreds of different jobs, you don't want hundreds of pay ranges. So that's why you would create these job grades where you're putting similar jobs together to create ranges. That makes your internal structure much simpler, but it also gives employees some kind of basis for motivating them to keep working in your company and to progress in their careers. Each pay grade where you've combined those jobs into a grade will have its own range, and then all the jobs within a single grade will have that same pay range. You won't have jobs in a grade that go above or beyond the minimum or maximum for that pay range. And then the midpoint for each pay range is just literally the maximum minus the minimum divided by 2. So whatever the middle is. So here, the maximum is $65,875 in this grade 2 pay range. The minimum is $43,917. And then your midpoint is literally the point in between those two. So $54,986. The range spread is something different. That's the maximum pay divided by the minimum pay minus 1. So if you were to do this calculation, I haven't included it here, you'll get something around $21,000. If what that says, you'll actually not get 21,000. Sorry, you'll get something like 0.499. It's almost 0.5. What that 0.5 means is it's 0.5 of the minimum of that pay range. So if you did maximum pay divided by minimum pay minus 1 for this pay grade, and then you got 0.499 whatever, and you times that by 43,917, you'll get something like 21,000 something. That's 0.499 of that $43,917. So what that's saying is the range spread for this grade 2 range is about 50% of the minimum pay of that range. Now, that might be something that's part of your pay policy in your organization. Where are these midpoints for these different ranges? It also can tell you if some ranges are way bigger than others based on this range spread. That might be something to help you figure out, is that okay that some ranges are bigger than others, or do you need to condense or lengthen some so that they're all about the same size? We can also have grade differentials. So that's like sort of the overlap across these different pay grades. We want an optimal overlap. So you do need some overlap. You don't want like pay, like on this illustration, you don't want the pay grade for A to be well below pay grade B where there's no overlap at all, because you want to motivate employees to seek promotion into a higher grade, but you don't necessarily want to have to jump their salary a whole lot if they get into a job that's in the next pay grade. So you can slowly increase their pay over time by having some overlap in these pay grades, which also means that they won't be disappointed if they're in that job for a few years and their pay only goes up incrementally over years. They're still within that pay grade range that's pretty normal, and they'll be above people who didn't start, say you're in pay grade B because you got promoted from a pay grade A job. You'll be in the higher part of that pay grade probably. And you'll have time to work all the way to the maximum potentially in that pay grade B. So you want to give people time to be able to work from wherever they start in that pay grade to the very top of that pay grade. And over time, as you update your internal pay structure, those pay grades, the maximums will continue to increase as well. I should note though, we're talking about these grades and ranges. Not all employers use them. If you only have a few jobs in your workplace, you may not need to use grades and ranges to organize your internal pay structure. Others for some of the decisions they made around their internal pay structure just don't use grades and ranges either. Another thing that we can do is actually combine different pay grades, especially if we have lots and lots of different pay grades into broad bands. And broad bands just consolidate those grades into a single band. And it changes the minimum and maximum so that the pay range essentially is much larger within a broad band. That's why it's called a broad band. What this does is it encourages employees to seek growth and development by moving cross-functionally. So essentially what they're doing is they're instead of getting promoted vertically into, say, the next pay grade, if you have broad bands, people can get a job, a different job within the same pay band, and their pay might increase a little bit, but they're not going into a whole different pay grade. And so you're asking people to learn skills and do different jobs that might be quite similar to each other so that they get a broader perspective of the organization and they develop those skills more broadly. This is actually really beneficial if you have like a succession plan, for example, in your organization where you want people to learn lots of different skills or learn different areas of the business to get that experience before they go into top leadership. So they have a good understanding of how the whole organization works, not just the few areas they may have worked in over their time in that organization. The assumption is that the cross-fertilization of these ideas benefits the organization now and in the long run by having people who know how to do lots of different jobs in that organization. And then career moves within bands then become much more common than between bands. That can help control your labor costs, but it also can motivate employees to work within those bands before they can be promoted into a different pay band. We will have to adjust our pay structure very likely based on that external survey data we got. So our job structure that we created through our job analysis will order the jobs on the basis of internal factors. And that's where they'll have either job evaluation or skill certification. And we may have actual like points associated with each job. But our pay structure is actually something a little bit different from the job structure. This is anchored in that external competitive position. So your job structure may be one way, but your actual pay structure may be slightly different because when you incorporate that external pay information, you might have to change that how much jobs are being paid a little bit differently than you would have if you just used evaluation points from your internal job analysis. And that's what the pay policy line does. It reflects that difference between the job structure that you created in your internal for your internal pay structure to include that external information so that the pay reflects both of those pieces of information. The order in which jobs are ranked on the internal versus external factors may not agree. And I mentioned this before in the first video. So that's where you have to do some decision making. One decision that some organizations make or some managers make is to just weigh the external market data more heavily than the internal job evaluation. And the idea behind that is that you are competing with other employers for those same employees to either get new employees or to keep the employees you have. And so you need to weight that external pay data much higher than your own internal pay structure to keep those employees or to attract new employees. Sometimes you can have differences between where you ranked a job in your internal pay structure through your job analysis in a very different way than your external information is showing, where employers may pay a lot more for that job than you would have ranked it in your hierarchy in your job structure. And that might be because there was a shortage of a particular skill that's driven up the market rate for people who have those specific skills. So a really good example right now is AI. There are some organizations, and I literally just read last week an article about how this is happening in higher education. There are some in higher education, there are some universities, usually they're big universities or like Ivy League universities that have a lot of resources. They're paying so much for people who have AI skills, who can do research on artificial intelligence, or who can teach artificial intelligence, like incorporated into their classes. They're paying a lot for people who have a high amount of skill in that, where they've done a lot of research and study. It's not that they just know how to use ChatGPT, but they have some kind of specialty or expertise within AI, and they're paying so much more than other professors are getting that's actually throwing off their pay rates for a lot of these professionals. And so that's something that's happening not only in academia or in higher education, but it's happening in other companies as well with AI. Another decision you can make, and this can be your actual, essentially your pay policy in your organization, is to just use market pricing. What this does is it just sets all of the jobs in your organization, instead of using your internal job analysis, it just sets all of their pay for your pay structure based on the external market rates that you got in your survey. Pure market pricing completely ignores that internal alignment. So this is where companies sometimes don't really do or have an internal structure other than what they get from their market information from their survey, because it doesn't matter. They're just trying to compete with the market on all of their jobs. How much or what mix of forms? So like, are you going to just have pay? Do you have bonuses? Are you going to have stock options? That sort of thing. Those differences between companies no longer matter if you're just going to use pure market pricing, because you're just doing exactly what your competitors are doing. You have no competitive advantage anymore in how much you pay people or what mix or forms of pay that you give them, because you're just doing exactly what your competitors are doing. That also means that any unique aspects of your organization's pay structure are completely de-emphasized by market prices. So it's not something that can attract new employees or necessarily keep employees, because there's nothing different about you, your company, and the way that you pay versus what your competitors are willing to pay for the same employees. In contrast, an organization that chooses to differentiate its pay strategy from its competitors can better execute its own strategy because it is unique to that organization. They've made some very important decisions that are hard to replicate for their competitors, and they can also provide other benefits or other ways of organizing the work in their organization that can attract employees that isn't just about pay. So it may mean that you don't always match what competitors are willing to pay, but you offer something different to your employees, which means that you can attract certain kinds of employees, which might be much more consistent with your organizational strategy than just going for any employee who's willing to be paid whatever your competitors are willing to pay. So that's something you have to think about. Do you want a kind of a unique pay structure, or are you okay with just pure market pricing where you use the same pay structure as your competitors do?